Lakeland Public Television and area news partners are proud to present Debate Night 2012, a look at our area legislative candidates. And now, the State House of Representatives District 5B debate. Your moderator tonight is Roy Blackwood.
Good evening and welcome, or welcome back as the case may be, to Debate Night 2012. 11 debates over 4 nights. Tonight's debate is from Lakeland Public Television Studio in Bemidji, and this hour is for House District 5B candidates. And they are Carolyn McElfatrick, the Republican candidate, and Tom Anzelc, the Democratic candidate. We have a panel of journalists with us this evening as well to ask questions of the candidates, and they are Dennis Wyman, Lakeland Public Television News Director, Steve Wagner, Bemidji Pioneer Editor, and Scott Hall, KAXE News Director. The rules for tonight's debate are as follows. Each candidate will offer 3-minute opening comments. Then the panel members will ask questions of the candidate. Some of their questions will be their questions, others will be from the public. The candidates will rotate the order in which they speak, beginning with the opening comments and finishing with closing comments. The opening comment order was secured at an earlier date by random choice. So each candidate gets 2 minutes to answer the questions, and each candidate will have a 1-minute opportunity for rebuttal. The questions will continue until we're about 50 minutes into the debate, at which time we will move to closing comments, and you will have 2 minutes each for those closing comments. Are there any questions about the rules? Hearing none, then we will move on to the opening statements, and Ms. McElfatrick would have the first chance, the opening statement.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I again want to thank Lakeland Public Television for scheduling these debates and for your continued commitment to voter education. The many hours of debate that you schedule every election year are certainly set you apart as leaders in the communications business. I thought I might just give a little personal background for the people, particularly in Cass County, who may not know me as well as Itasca County residents. I was born, raised, and educated in Minnesota. My parents and my 2 older brothers farmed in Moore County. I received my nursing education and did my graduate work in Rochester. And after marriage, I accompanied my husband to both Fort Dix, New Jersey, and Busan, South Korea. So those years with the military gave me some insights into the challenges that military families face. The 87th legislative session was a challenge in many ways. We began with about a $6 billion deficit, and that was perhaps the largest in the state history. The Republicans took the majority of both chambers for the first time in nearly 40 years. The decisions that we had to make were difficult, but I believe we all worked hard together to be sensitive and fair to the true needs of the state and of our people. After the budget work of 2011, the main objective in 2012 was government reform. I believe that it's important as we look at increasing spending of a government that we also look at those things that may be inefficiencies that drive costs up and waste tax dollars. Ultimately, structural reform will save millions of dollars in public funding over the years in the future. Nearly everyone agrees right now that jobs and economic recovery are the #1 task in the state. The legislature passed several bills that were designed to incentivize growth of business and encourage job creation in the state and to draw in investment from outside the state. We listened to business leaders, and what they were telling us was that taxes and the cost of health care were the 2 greatest barriers to job creation. I think the state has excellent resources, and we can have a strong economic future if we use proper foresight and we have leaders who are truly willing to listen and to work without fear for a political career.
Thank you, Ms. McElfatrick. And now, Mr. Anzelc, if you would give us your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Roy, and I too want to thank the panelists for taking time from their busy schedules to do this. This is very, very important work, and this forum hopefully will provide the needed clarity for the voters to make a good decision, many decisions, on November 6th. You've heard the old saying, this is a very important election. Well, it is a very important election. And in this particular race between Representative McElfatrick and myself, I have great respect for her, but we have major and quite often serious differences of opinion about the legislative process, about the legislature itself, and about what's best for the future of this great area of Minnesota, northern Minnesota. I'm from northern Minnesota. I was born in northern Minnesota. Of course, I live in northern Minnesota. And most everyone at the Capitol will tell you that in my work, I speak and I vote for northern Minnesota. I've enjoyed my 3 terms in the Minnesota House of Representatives. The old district, or the current District 3A, contained Lake of the Woods County, Koochiching County, and much of Itasca County. If elected, I'm looking forward to serving much of my existing district, as well as new areas in Itasca and a lot of new area in Cass County. Most of the citizens and neighbors in District 3A will tell you that I have been available and accessible and willing to sit down and roll up my sleeves to work with them to solve problems that they may have with state government or any other local unit of government. I serve on the Veterans Services Committee, where I do many, many hours a month of constituent work on behalf of our existing veterans and veterans about to be returning back to Minnesota. I serve on K-12 Education Finance, which, as you know, is a very critical part of state government for northern Minnesota. And I serve on the Commerce Committee, where many, many business issues are the purview of that committee. So I look forward to this forum, and I look forward to a good, healthy exchange.
Thank you, sir. That concludes our opening statements. We'll move forward now with questions, and the first question will be from Mr. Dennis Wyman, Lakeland News. Mr. Wyman.
Okay, thanks, Roy, and thank you both for participating in the debates once again this year. This is the 3rd debate tonight, and it's also the 3rd one where we have 2 incumbents facing each other. In fact, as Roy said, we have 11 debates overall. We're doing all 3 with the incumbent versus incumbent races are tonight, and you're the last of them. There's been some talk tonight already about how the district has changed. What has changed as far as the way you will have to represent the district, or has that changed at all? Are there any new issues that are a part now of your new district?
Mr. Anzelc, would you answer first, please?
One of the wonderful things about the people of northern Minnesota is whether you're at the doorstep of somebody in Reamer or at the doorstep of somebody in Beauvais or Grand Rapids, they have a lot to say. And they have good questions, and they are challenging in their beliefs. Without question, property taxes, rising property taxes, the loss of the state-paid homestead credit, what that is going to do to local units of government ability to provide needed and necessary local government services is on the minds of everybody. The decision to eliminate the homestead credit particularly hurt northern Minnesota, where we have a property poor area, as opposed to the wealthy metropolitan suburbs where losing the homestead credit that the state previously paid really hasn't had much impact. But it has a lot of impact here. I voted against taking away the homestead credit. I do it again. I believe when the legislature reconvenes in January, it is imperative that Democrats and Republicans alike come together to restore the state-paid homestead credit, which is particularly damaging to the people of northern Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Anzelc. Ms. McElfatrick.
Thank you. I believe we were talking about how we will represent our districts, perhaps, and the changes that the redistricting would offer. There are great similarities between 3B and 5B in that tourism is important, logging is important, and of course the need for jobs is important. So in that respect, it's a very comfortable move of districts for me. But since Representative Anzelc has raised the issue of the market value homestead credit elimination, I think I would like to address that just briefly. That was a failed program in that we paid what the local governments anticipated to be paid and were due to be paid only once in 10 years. That made it very difficult for them to plan their local budgets. And so in an effort to give them a better budget planning foundation, we did eliminate the homestead market value credit, but in its place, the homestead market exclusion was instituted, and there were other property tax relief issues that were also implemented. So we didn't leave them simply without that previous help. There is money. We have increased the property tax relief by $30 million. And so even though we strayed a little bit off the initial question, I think that was necessary to respond to.
Thank you, Ms. McElfatrick. Mr. Anzelc, any rebuttal?
Well, my concern about this issue is not directed toward budget planning for government. It's more about budget planning for homeowners. And homeowners, especially those on fixed incomes, especially those already paying very high property taxes in relationship to their income, are faced with a real challenging situation here. The truth of the matter is the Republican majority in the House of Representatives partially balanced the state budget by sending $600 million less of state money to homeowners with the homestead property tax credit. That $600 million instead was applied by the Republican majority to the budget deficit situation. A $600 million item.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick.
Since Representative Anzelc mentioned the fact that property taxes are difficult for many people, and I acknowledge that that is true, I would wonder then why he voted against limiting property taxes for seniors to 5% of their income. That was in May of 2008.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question comes from Mr. Wagner.
Thanks for both to you for being here today. We can't help but talk about the weather in northern Minnesota, and that often means natural disasters. In 2012, we saw both damaging storms bringing wind through northern Minnesota and also flooding in Cass County all the way through to the northeast. But something happens every year, forcing legislators and the governor to scramble to find funds. And the solution seems to be different each time. Is there something the state can do to make sure victims of all disasters are treated equally and that they get aid quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Ms. McElfatrick, chance first, please.
Thank you very much. I think that there was discussion this year about how we would approach disaster relief funding to make it a little bit more uniform in the event that that happens again, which it will at some point. And I think that that needs to be addressed. That is a good question. I think we did a good job this time of working to provide good relief for the people that were affected by both the blowdowns and by the flooding. And one thing that I was encouraged by was the fact that when we all got together in St. Paul, many of the hard decisions had been worked through, and it remained for us to scrutinize the bill, and there was a good level of agreement on that bill. So I was very happy to see that kind of agreement. One of the areas that I looked at in Aiken County and worked very hard toward was the funding for those farmers who had property underwater for almost a month. They lost hay crops. That made it impossible for them to feed their cattle off from their own property, and purchase of hay becomes very expensive. So as you look at the details of the disaster relief, I think we did a good job, and yes, I think we could improve how we do the disaster relief in the future.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Anzelc?
I was basically pleased with the $8 million that we were able to secure in the special session for Hubbard, Cass, Beltrami, Itasca, and a couple of other counties, Aiken as well. But quite frankly, government resources are being squeezed throughout the service delivery network. I would have liked to have done more. I would like to do more the next time we have the next disaster. This one was unique, incredibly unique, and was a terrible strain on law enforcement and emergency responders with overtime and so on. It taxed municipalities. But there can always be improvement in the way we deliver government services. And with regard to these natural disasters, which quite frankly are becoming more common, we need to do better, and we need to do more, and perhaps individual homeowner means testing formulas in order to provide government assistance to those who not only have the damage but are most in need of the government help.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick, any rebuttal?
No, not a rebuttal, but something that Representative Anzelc said. I certainly want to compliment all of the public officials who were responsible for managing the situations in both of the counties that I serve currently. I thought they did an excellent job, and it was very calm, it was very professional, and it was done, I think, very well. I was very proud of them all.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Anzelc, any other comments?
Well, quite frankly, we're in agreement. We did the best we could. I believe we should do better. But I think it's disingenuous to support the services and the programs when you, as a legislator, don't support raising the revenue to provide the dollars, to provide the services, to provide the relief to everyday citizens. You can't have one without the other.
Thank you, sir. Next question from Mr. Hall, KXE.
Thanks, Roy. The last 3 or 4 legislative sessions, the legislature and governor have put together budgets that are kind of taking funds from one-time sources like the tobacco fund, borrowing from schools. In other words, the budget's been patched together in kind of a unsustainable way. So maybe this question would involve how you would make the budget system a little more predictable, a little more stable, and perhaps include that maybe how you would reform some of the ways we tax.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Anzelc?
Well, this is a really spectacular question, and it's probably the issue that Representative McElfatrick and I most disagree about. Contrary to what she has been saying and advocating in this campaign, the budget was not balanced, the budget is not balanced, and the 2013 legislature will face yet another deficit. We hope that revenue, due to the job retention and job creation efforts of the Dayton administration, and we hope that tax collections will catch up. But in the event that they don't catch up, we are looking at a deficit. We are looking at cheating public schools 40 cents out of every dollar that the state promised them on the school formula. School districts throughout the state, especially in northern Minnesota, are having to borrow money to backfill the loss of the state money. Earlier, I mentioned the elimination of the homestead property tax. That needs to be fixed. At a minimum, in terms of the plan, at a minimum, the Democrats proposed closing corporate loopholes for foreign operating corporations who incorporate in places like Belize and Gibraltar and the Cayman Islands. We wanted to plug that loophole, which would have created $300 million a year. We could have applied it to the school shift, and at least then the schools would know that there's a plan to pay the money back.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick?
Well, thank you. Again, I think we may have strayed a little bit from the initial question, which was how we would do the budget preparation a little bit more smoothly. There are so many moving parts to the state government, and it is such a massive budget. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. I think that from my observation, we're doing as the best we can with such a diverse kind of, if you want to compare it to a business, we are very diverse. There are so many different components to it. Certainly looking at the biggest items first is important, making sure that we're covering those. And since Representative Anzelc strayed a little bit again in talking about the school shift, our budget was balanced and it was completed on time. The school shift was nothing that we had in our original budget. That was part of the negotiations to end the shutdown. It was certainly nothing that any one of us really wanted to do. But I would like to mention that even though there was a shift, every student in the state got $50 additional funding to cover any interest that might need to be paid if there were a need for a short-term loan. So that was covered. Most superintendents were, I think, fairly content with the money that they got because, in fact, it was the biggest K-12 budget we have ever spent. I'd also like to point out that in 2010, Representative Anzelc himself voted for a $2 billion school funding shift. And I think perhaps he's hoping that the public will not remember that.
Mr. Anzelc, I sense a need for a rebuttal.
Well, twice now, my record has been challenged. In the first instance, the provision that Representative McElfatrick has alluded to was a provision in a horrible omnibus bill that virtually every Democrat farmer labor member opposed. And with regard to her second claim, she is correct. There was a shift. There have always been shifts. But what is different with this shift is there's no plan. There's no plan that school boards and parents and teachers and students can count on so that they have some confidence that the shift will be paid back. That's what makes this one different.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick, anything else you'd like to say?
Yes, thank you. Actually, we passed a bill that would have paid back the shift from 2011 and begun to pay back the shift that was created in 2010. That was, however, vetoed. We do have a plan, and because of the surplus that we enjoy right now in Minnesota, we are paying back the shift at an accelerated rate.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Mr. Wyman.
Okay, thanks, Roy. U.S. economy continuing to kind of struggle along, trying to find its footing. In Minnesota, similar case for the most part. What would you advocate at the state legislature to help improve the economy, help bring more jobs into the state and into your district?
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick.
Well, that is a really good question. Thank you. There were a number of items that we had in a wonderful bill. Chairman Greg Davids of the House Tax Committee called it his smoking hot tax bill. And included in that bill were the plan to freeze the commercial and industrial tax that's imposed statewide on businesses, irregardless of how much money they make. They are taxed with this tax. We had initially wanted to phase it out altogether because it is abusive of businesses. When that was not acceptable, we wanted to at least freeze it. We did pursue permit reform in both 2011 and 2012, which allows our businesses to move forward a bit faster with less redundancy in the process. Certainly does not neglect the environmental provisions, but it does eliminate some of the inefficiencies in the paperwork. We had provision for increasing the Angel credit tax that would have encouraged business development in rural Minnesota. Tort reform, so that we were less abusive of our businesses. We had education reform. Some of them we were able to get through, some of them we were not. But we know that we need to equip our workforce to move into jobs, and by implementing education reform, we better prepare our students for that.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Anzelc.
Let's be perfectly clear here. The Republican plan to deal with the school shift would have spent down the state's reserves to zero. That doesn't sound like a very Republican plan to me, when families would never spend down to zero unless they absolutely had to. With regard to the economy and jobs in northern Minnesota, everybody knows we're natural resources dependent. We mine minerals, we cut trees, we have beautiful lakes and forests. But because all three of those sectors, including tourism and our resort community and our hunting and fishing and recreation, ATVs and snowmobiles, because everything basically revolves around resources: the earth, the soil, the air, our environment. We are faced with a regulatory climate and a regulatory approach that is difficult to understand, overlapping, federal responsibility versus state responsibility versus local responsibility. Certainly streamlining is necessary for any of our major sectors of our job creation economy to grow and to prosper. That's job one. Regulatory improvement, regulatory cooperation, and transparency in the way government deals with those job creators who are natural resources based.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick, any rebuttal?
Well, just only briefly, that when we began the 87th legislative session in 2011, the reserve fund and the cash flow account had been drained to zero. That's where we started.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Anzelc, anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, next question then from Mr. Wagner from the Pioneer.
Well, it's pretty clear that we have some strong opinions and differences on whether there's a state budget deficit or surplus, and how to tackle the issues facing the state. If you had your way, how would the budget look next year? What types of things would you do to address the issues facing the state? Are you looking at cutting programs, and if so, what programs? Would you raise taxes? If so, what taxes? Please be specific so voters know just where you stand.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Mr. Anzelc.
Again, a very insightful question. Additional cuts to programs and services are going to be very, very difficult to accomplish. And that is because the intergovernmental relationship between state government and local units of government has basically gone astray here. They have tinkered and cut local government aid. They have tinkered and cut county program aid. They have made it more difficult for local units of government to deliver services that the state prescribes for them to deliver. That is a real problem. So therefore, of course, the state needs to seriously look at overhauling the way in which revenue is generated for state government and for local units of government. The property tax is the least progressive and the most harmful to northern Minnesota. The income tax, if it is progressive, if it is fair, if it is loophole-free, and if it recognizes the fact that wealthy Minnesotans, top 1%, top 2%, as a percentage of income are paying less state taxes than a lower middle class family with 2 children, that is a serious problem, and I would support a reform of Minnesota's revenue system with those principles in mind.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick.
We're seeing a stronger economy now, and we are actually ahead of projections with our revenue receipts. So as we approach the next session, I anticipate that there will be a deficit, but what they're anticipating is probably closer to $1 billion than the 6 that we faced in January of 2011. So the problem that we face will not be nearly as great. I still believe, personally, and I hear at the doors over and over again, that the people of the state expect Minnesota to live within its means. We were very determined that we would do that. We maintained all along we didn't have a revenue problem. We have a very high tax rate in the state. What we needed to do was reform and to bring our spending under control. And we worked very hard to do that, and we worked hard to be fair at that, and I think we did a good job of that. So with the modest surplus that we have in hand right now, and being ahead of projections with our revenue receipts, I think we can move into the next session with some confidence.
Thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal, Mr. Anzelc.
I agree that Minnesota's economic condition is improving, largely thanks to the progressive policies of Governor Dayton and his administration. So that's the good news. The bad news is we will have a deficit in January of 2013. $1 billion structural, $2.4 billion in promised money to school districts, $600 million in the takeaway of the Homestead property tax credit, which really hurts seniors. There is a deficit, no denial. I'm ready to go to work in January to help Governor Dayton deal with that deficit.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Yeah, I'm sorry, yes. Go on to the next question, Mr. Hall.
All right, Roy, thanks. Say in November, Minnesota voters are going to be asked to approve or turn down 2 proposed amendments to the Minnesota Constitution. One has to do with requiring a photo ID when people vote. The other has to do with making, I guess, recognizing a marriage between a man and a woman as the only form of marriage in the state. I just wonder where you both stand on those issues and how you would persuade voters one way or the other to support you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Ms. McElfatrick?
Well, I voted to place both of those issues on the ballot, so that would say that I support both of them. These are issues that have been around for quite some time, and it was inevitable that the question was going to have to come to a decision at some point. As far as the marriage amendment goes, this has been an issue that's very important to very many people. And because it's a core value, I think the most fair thing that we can do is to allow the voters of the state, rather than a few legislators or perhaps a judge, to make that decision for them. It doesn't change what isn't already in law. It just makes it stronger. And so, again, I would repeat that I believe that this is the most fair way we can approach this decision, by letting every voter in the state have his or her voice heard. On the voter ID, this is an issue that is so important. It is the foundation of our form of government, the one man, one vote. And there is enough concern that our elections do not maintain the integrity that they should have. And with the backing of one of the federal commission's reports that encouraged photo ID, I think that we, again, will put this to the people. Let them decide. These are core values. These are things that I think every voter in the state has a right to be heard on.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Anzelc?
Thank you. I voted against both amendments on the House floor. I'm going to be voting against both amendments when I vote personally on November 6th. I do not believe that the Minnesota State Constitution should be used by any one political party or any one school of thought. And in this case, I believe these are extreme measures that the legislature and the governor could not and would not pass because they are so extreme, because common threads just don't exist. But because of sheer numbers, the Republicans control the Senate, the Republicans control the House. They circumvented checks and balances, separation of powers, and put 2 divisive measures which are designed to take rights from the people. The Constitution in Minnesota and the United States Constitution are most often used to guarantee rights to the people because we hold to be self-evident these core values that we must guarantee to the people. I can see amending the Constitution, the state Constitution, to provide equal, fair funding of public education as an example. That's much different than these 2 amendments, which are designed to make us less rather than to improve the people's condition in this great state.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick, any rebuttal?
Yes, thank you. I disagree with Representative Anzelc. These are not extreme issues. These are basics. The one man, one vote is basic to our government. This is what we build our kind of government on. And if we have someone who has accessed a public ballot and is not entitled to that ballot, that person is weakening the vote, disenfranchising a legitimate voter. I referenced a statute, a federal statute, and what I was trying to think of was Help America Vote, 2000. They recommended photo ID. This is not extreme. And defining marriage as one man, one woman, again, is not extreme.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Anzelc?
Well, quite frankly, one person, one vote is not the real issue. The real issue is the poor, rural, minority, disabled, and people who otherwise have complexities in their lives. This will make matters worse. This will make democracy more of a challenge for those among us who have less. I really think that's a bad idea. And I also think that, going back to the Constitution should empower us, not take away from us.
Thank you, sir. Next question, Mr. Wyman.
Okay, thanks, Roy. We'll try to squeeze in a couple more questions here, so I'll keep the question short. What policies would you advocate to reduce our dependency on foreign oil? There currently is a nuclear plant moratorium. Would you favor keeping that or lifting that?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Anzelc?
I have opposed lifting the moratorium on additional nuclear power plants. In light of the disaster in Japan, in light of the recent shutdown at one of the state's 2 nuclear plants, I think technology needs a chance to catch up a little bit to what is actually going on as these nuclear plants age. And then again, of course, we've got spent nuclear fuel being stored throughout the United States next to these nuclear power plants, rather than in a centralized national domestic repository for spent nuclear fuel. Renewables are the future. A mixture of fuels, including clean coal, including wind, including hydroelectric. That's what makes northern Minnesota a better place to do business. That's what we need. This is a very complicated area, and hopefully technology will catch up with the demand for change.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick?
Thank you. Well, the dependence on foreign oil in many respects is a federal issue rather than a state. But since you raised the question of the moratorium on nuclear fuel, or power plants rather, 35 years ago, I argued against the use of nuclear powered plants because of the half-life, the storage time. It was just beyond human comprehension. We were talking in thousands of years for storage of the so-called spent rods. But our technology has come along to such a degree now that we're not talking about half-life in thousands of years, but we have the capability to reduce the half-life to tens of years. And in addition, not only do we make better use of the nuclear fuel that we would be using, we can go back, unearth the rods that are in storage now, and further deplete their energy. We've come a long way. Nuclear is, I think, a very clean, a very dependable, and has been a very safe source of energy in this country. And with the current technology, I think we really need to consider it. Unfortunately, the moratorium is still in place. And it takes many years, I think 10 to 15 years, to build a nuclear power plant. So we don't have that on the near horizon.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Anzelc, rebuttal?
Well, we don't have any nuclear power plants in northern Minnesota, but we do have a lot of very expensive gasoline. And I think more of our energy more of our ingenuity, more of our creativity ought to be going into figuring out how to do gasoline cheaper so it doesn't put us all out of business.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick, anything else?
Well, just that we have the potential of cellulosic fuels for energy. And we do have, even though there's a lot of controversy with it, we do have ethanol, and they are a $6 billion industry in Minnesota.
Thank you, ma'am. And for our final question of this evening, Mr. Hall from KXE.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. What do you think of the expansion of gambling as a source for revenues for the state of Minnesota? There seems to be a trend going that way.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick?
Thank you. I'm not a proponent of expanding gambling in the state. I know there is a lot of controversy about it. There's a lot of discussion with opinion on what direction we should go. Personally, I feel that there are so many associated social costs with it. There have been estimates in reliable studies that say for every dollar in, there are $3 out. Now, those wouldn't all be public dollars. But gambling facilities are known to receive most of their income from the problem gambler. So when you look at that, they estimate as much as 54% of their income comes from problem gamblers. So when you look at that, you have to look at broken families, more children in poverty, suicide often accompanies problem gambling, increased crime rates in the near vicinity of a facility. So I am not a proponent of expanding into the state gambling.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Anzelc.
Thank you. I supported the Minnesota Viking stadium legislation and the expansion of charitable gambling as a means to fund the public share to build that stadium. My opponent, of course, voted no on the Viking Stadium. Having said that, with transparency in mind, once upon a time was the director of the state's Charitable Gambling Control Board. And I've seen the good that charitable gambling has done, but I don't support any further expansion of gambling in our state. I don't support casinos. I don't support racinos. I think we have enough. I think the Minnesota Vikings was a special and unique situation that we had, and what we ended up with the state's funding source was an expansion of charitable gambling, but charitable gambling already existed. What we did was we expanded it to include electronic pull tabs and electronic linked bingo. It was not, in my view, more gambling.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick, a rebuttal?
Not a rebuttal. It's nice to find something we agreed on.
Okay, Mr. Anzelc.
Very good. Victory.
Hey, thank you very much. Then that concludes the question portion of the debate. We would ask then that you take 2 minutes each for closing comments, and begin with Ms. McElfatrick.
Thank you very much. I have been honored to serve in the Minnesota House of Representatives. It's an awesome responsibility, and I thank the people who have placed their trust in me to do that job. We did begin the session in January 2011 with an enormous deficit and left behind in May 2012 a modest surplus. We advanced improvements in the permitting process that will help businesses to move forward faster. We move forward with government reforms that make us slimmer and more efficient. We introduced education reforms and passed legislation to eliminate welfare program abuse, and that is a problem that robs both from our taxpayers and from those people who truly do need our help. And we did pass bills this year that would have protected the unborn had they been signed into law by the governor. I believe that Minnesotans are looking for common sense solutions to their state's problems. They want leaders who understand that private industry, not government, builds a strong economy and creates those long-term jobs that we all want. I believe that they're looking for people who will take on the problems head-on and do what needs to be done, even when that pathway is sometimes difficult. Rarely is the quick and easy solution the best long-term solution. I would like to return to St. Paul to continue building a healthy future for our children. I was taught by my parents to work hard, tell the truth, and respect others. Those are principles that I live by. I'll continue to stand for strong support of personal liberty and personal responsibility and against burdensome government. So I'm asking for the support of the support of the people of District 5B on November 6th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Anzelc, your closing statement, please.
I've really enjoyed our time together this evening. I think there should be more forums similar to this so that the citizens have a better chance of making better informed decisions. I've especially enjoyed being with my opponent, Representative McElfatrick. A lot of people probably wouldn't realize this, but we see each other every day and we visit every day and we treat each other respectfully and with a good attitude. But it's that good attitude and it's that respect that I've seen is missing in the Minnesota legislature over the last couple of years. We've gotten more polarized. There's less looking for common threads and much more what I would call gotcha politics on both ends. I would also say that the people who know me at the Capitol and at home in the district know that I work hard, that I like the job, and they know that northern Minnesota is way more important to me than any political party or any interest. It's northern Minnesota that I'm most concerned about. The people of northern Minnesota are my only special interest. And I just ask the people to vote for me on November 6th. I'll do a good job. I'll represent them well, and I'll speak up for them when I get down there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElfatrick, Mr. Anzelc, thank you very much for being here this evening and sharing your views with the voters. And thank you to the panelists for your astute questions, and especially thank you to the voters who have taken your time to become informed. We will have another series of 3 televised debates tomorrow evening. The first one will begin at 7 p.m. They will be the candidates for Senate District 2, Dennis Moser, the Republican, and Rod Scoey, the Democrat. We hope you'll join us then. Until then, good night.